Imagine the most luxurious palace in Europe. Gold everywhere, gleaming marble, heavy silks, and diamonds reflected in hundreds of enormous mirrors. Courtiers in lavish outfits embroidered with pearls gracefully bow to their king. But if you found yourself in that crowd, the first thing to hit your nose would not be the scent of exquisite incense, but the thick, suffocating smell of human waste, stale sweat, and unwashed bodies. In the most majestic building in the world, the symbol of absolute power, there was not a single proper toilet, while behind its shining facades lay filth that tourist brochures prefer not to mention. To understand how this monumental absurdity came into being, one must look at the young Louis XIV.
He did not simply decide, on a whim, to build his main residence 20 kilometers from Paris, on the site of his father's modest hunting lodge. As a child, the future Sun King lived through the Fronde, a brutal noble uprising, during which an enraged crowd from the capital burst directly into his bedroom. This primal fear of Paris and of his own aristocracy changed his thinking forever. The king realized that nobles were deadly dangerous when they sat in their ancestral castles, collected taxes, and wove conspiracies. He needed a golden cage, a grand trap that would pull the elite out of their estates, bring them together in one place, and make them completely dependent on royal favor alone.
The location chosen for this was truly insane. Before construction began, Versailles was a miserable, marshy lowland. Swarms of malaria-carrying mosquitoes, sticky mud, and soil utterly unsuitable for monumental architecture. The decision to build there was driven partly by the monarch's mule-like stubbornness and partly by pragmatic political calculation. There were no powerful landowners nearby whose ancestral lands would have to be bought out. Then began a battle against nature itself. Tens of thousands of workers, at the peak of construction as many as 36,000 at once, manually drained the foul-smelling marshes, built gigantic terraces, and leveled the land. The price of this royal whim was enormous. Mortality among the builders from malaria and dysentery exceeded all imaginable limits. Exact numbers of the dead still do not exist, but memoirists of the time, such as the Marquis de Dangeau, left horrifying accounts. At night, heavily loaded carts carrying the bodies of the dead were secretly removed from the construction site, so that the sight of corpses in the morning would not frighten the survivors or provoke riots. On these bones and drained swamps, a park was created that was meant to become an extension of the king's ego. The chief gardener, André Lenotre, embodied here the philosophy of tamed nature. The gardens of Versailles did not tolerate naturalness. This was nature harshly subordinated to geometry and dictatorship. Not a single random bush, not one uneven alley. Tens of thousands of mature trees were brought from all over France to instantly create the illusion of an ancient forest, without waiting for saplings to grow. And at the center of this green magnificence, workers manually dug the Grand Canal, 1.6 kilometers long, transforming a marshy hollow into a smooth mirror of water. But the true magic of power required not only external grandeur, but internal splendor as well. And here begins a story that sounds more like a spy thriller. In the 17th century, mirrors were worth their weight in gold, and the production of large mirror panels was the absolute monopoly of Venice. The masters of the island of Murano guarded the secret of their craft under threat of death. If a glassmaker tried to escape, the Republic sent hired killers after him. Jean-Baptiste Colbert, Louis's all-powerful minister, organized an unprecedented campaign of industrial espionage. French agents secretly smuggled several leading Venetian masters into France, promising them incredible wealth. Venice was furious, protesting through every diplomatic channel and threatening the families of the fugitives with retaliation. Soon, several of the craftsmen working in France died under mysterious circumstances, while others returned home in terror. Historians disagree on the explanation, whether it was poison from Venetian assassins or simply illness caused by toxic mercury fumes, but the goal had been achieved. France obtained the technology and founded its own royal mirror manufactory. The result of this secret war was the Hall of Mirrors, a political triumph cast in glass. Imagine a hall 73 meters long, where 357 enormous French mirrors were placed directly opposite 357 arched windows overlooking the garden. On a clear day, sunlight reflected hundreds of times, flooded the room, and blurred the boundaries of space. When Louis received foreign ambassadors here, each of them physically felt the power of a state capable of creating such magnificence.
Behind this dazzling facade lay the palace's main engineering problem. Versailles stood on a hill, and water was catastrophically scarce there. Louis, however, demanded fountains. Hundreds of jets of water had to operate simultaneously. The first attempts to solve the problem ended in embarrassing failures. Windmills, donkey-powered mechanisms, and small pumps could not provide the required pressure, while ponds dug on higher ground quickly dried up. Then the engineer Arnold de Ville and the brilliant carpenter Renikin Soulem entered the scene. In 1684, on the bank of the Seine near the village of Marly, they built a true industrial monster, the Machine of Marly. It was the greatest engineering structure of its time. 14 colossal water wheels, each 12 meters in diameter, drove a system of 253 pumps arranged in cascades on a steep slope. The machine lifted water from the river to 163 meters, from where it flowed through a several-kilometer aqueduct to Versailles. The roar of this wooden giant was so loud that the residents of Marly constantly complained about the noise, which shook their houses. Remarkably, the mechanism worked for almost 130 years.
At court, people preferred not to discuss one awkward fact out loud. Even the power of the Machine of Marly was not enough. When Louis XIV went for a walk through the gardens, a grand performance began. Special servants ran ahead of the royal procession, desperately turning on the fountains along the monarch's route. As soon as the king passed by, other servants, sneaking behind his back, immediately shut the water off. All of Versailles admired the power of the fountains, but no one ever saw them all working at the same time. Illusion became the foundation of absolute power. A similar illusion permeated the everyday life of the palace, where up to 20,000 people could be present at once: courtiers, servants, soldiers, and merchants. No sanitary standards had been planned for this enormous crowd. Elegant ladies and noble gentlemen relieved themselves directly in the corners of endless corridors, on dark stair landings, or behind decorative bushes. The contents of chamber pots were shamelessly poured out of the windows into inner courtyards. The problem reached such a scale that the king himself had to issue several decrees strictly ordering that feces be removed at least from the ceremonial staircases.
Heavy, concentrated perfumes appeared in the 17th century, partly as a response to the absence of basic hygiene. Versailles became the main engine of the French perfume industry, not because of refined taste, but because of the harsh necessity of somehow masking the heavy stench that hung inside those luxurious walls. The life of the nobility there was far from a fairy tale. In order to remain within the king's sight, aristocrats crowded into tiny, cold little rooms under the roof. Obtaining such a room was considered a major political victory. All life revolved around the monarch. Louis turned the ceremony of his morning awakening, the famous lever, into a virtuoso instrument for controlling the elite. Who would receive the honor of handing the king his morning shirt? Who would be allowed to take the nightcap from his hands? For the right to be present at this ritual, dukes and counts spun intrigues and were ready to destroy their rivals. This world collapsed as swiftly as it had risen. The year 1789 came, and an enraged crowd stormed into the palace. Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette left Versailles forever. Revolutionaries looted part of the luxurious interiors. Then the empty halls were turned into a museum, and later Napoleon used them for official receptions. History has a striking sense of symmetry. In the Hall of Mirrors, where Louis XIV had once dazzled Europe, the German Empire was triumphantly proclaimed in 1871. And in that very same hall, in 1919, the German delegation signed the Treaty of Versailles, which confirmed Germany's crushing defeat in the First World War.
Versailles remained in history not merely as a masterpiece of architecture. This building was conceived as the ultimate proof that one person could subordinate everything to himself. The rotten nature of the marshes, the stubborn aristocracy, the physics of flowing water, and space itself. Louis XIV achieved his goal, but in the final decades of his life, he almost never left the palace. Having created the grandest trap for his political enemies, the monarch eventually became its only prisoner. Have you ever been to Versailles? And while walking through those endless suites of rooms, did you feel that strange, almost frightening gap between the dazzling beauty of the facade and the cruel history that stands behind it?